thinking of that. I was
It was
hoping,
more-
here's the question, here's our answer.
In these meetings, we answered the question that, you know, the county doesn't have responsibility for that, you know, and we can't, or we answered the question that this is not land use, this is not the UL use.
Right.
We've answered questions that the comp plan is needed to support changes to potential changes to the land use code. So there are things that went on that we answered over and over again. I think what Wes is proposing is a little summary document that would just explain things, so if people read the document, they'll say, okay, now I get it. That's why they didn't do this, they did that. And then what you're talking about, like water and stuff, is really actually, you know, we heard water in several places, we heard wildfire in several places. But what's interesting is that in other places, you know, there was regional preferences about what the issues were.
Sure.
There really was, and the question for us to figure out is, are those comments, because, you know, I don't know how many people we had, maybe 100 people attend the 5 workshops, maybe. If you have 4 people that say something, but the other ones made comments about the other parts of the comp plan, but didn't make a comment about that specific topic, does that mean they're okay with it? So
Or the same.
yeah, that's the point, that's why it's hard to know, is when we came and did this, we did it based on what we think was the views of the 7 people here, or 6 at the time, primarily, and it was a compromise on that, so it'll be interesting to see how it goes on. I think, Wes, what I could ask you to do is if you could draft a sample of what that document would be, or what that page would be.
It's basically a frequently asked question.
It is a frequently asked question. It's great, that's a good way of thinking about it, John. It is a frequently asked.
Where I had taken it, maybe it was a little, because I agree with what Wes wants to do with that. That's kind of the answer. I was kind of focusing on the potential changes, because some of the comments all had the same gist, maybe reworded or different way of saying it, but there might have been 25 of them that were on water. So if we modify a water,
How many, John?
80.
80, okay.
80?
if we modify a water comment in the plan, then when we go back to address that rebuttal or explanation to the public comment, we would put that down as the action taken. We modified this policy, and it might go on every one of those 80 comments. I don't know.
My problem with that is you're gonna get trapped and we're gonna make a mistake down the line, and we're gonna say, oh, we answered it up there, when this guy was looking at it, the same issue in an entirely different
Sure.
way, and we didn't solve it back here. And
You mean the problem with the summary type of thing?
yes, that worries me. We'll get trapped and make some mistakes. The issue, one of yours was, well, we shouldn't do this because the state handles it, or the federal handles it. Well, in some cases that was correct, in some cases it was not correct. And I don't see how we can deal with those individual opinion issues, when
You
there's
might not
several
be able
different
to.
ones.
Yeah, John, one of my concerns was exactly when you look at each one of these comments. I don't know how many, I didn't count how many comments there
He
were.
did. He
I know,
did. He's
John.
on this
I
list
just
there,
did a
yeah.
simple word
Yeah.
search for
Yeah,
phrases.
right.
And
And my concern is that even how you respond to each one of those comments in the report, because it's not a simple yes or no. And you know, I think what we said we would do, and I think we need to do, is go and read the comments, and which we've all done. And I think we need to go through it today, start going through it today, and decide if, okay, some comments were just simply,
No action required.
yeah, no
Yeah, just
action required.
comments.
And we may not put anything on the action there, except to say we reviewed it on this day. And if they wanna listen to the tape that we have, they can do that. Because I'm afraid that if I do say something like, we believe that land use number whatever covers your issue, and they say, no, it doesn't, I I think you're better off just simply saying we reviewed it, that's what we promised, and we're gonna make some changes based on that. But the more specific you get on what you did and didn't do, the more debatable it becomes.
I think the process might resolve itself as we march along.
Okay.
I think so too.
Wanna march along? 'Cause I
Okay.
know I do, I've read this like 42 times.
Yeah.
Before you start, obviously, we saw a lot of comments about fire and wildfire. And I had these little brochures at the house, and they're pretty elementary, but I thought that they might trigger something.
Forgot my insurance company, good.
Yeah, and trigger something that might send us into, making some kind of change.
Mhm.
I got one for Sandy and David too. It should be. No, I thought I brought one.
No, that's not here.
Oh, yeah, there's extras.
Oh, yes, I got that in the mail.
Kurt should have
So
those.
is the, I mean, that's all I was suggesting. Do we not do the summary type of thing?
Well, I think what we need to do, Wes, is defer that until we go through this and find out where we actually are.
Right.
Okay.
Because I think there is a need to have some questions, a frequently asked question like John talked about. I think there are some frequently asked questions that we could add to the Kootenai, keeping Kootenai site on some of those issues. And as we go through this, we may agree, 'cause like I said, I came up with maybe 3 or 4 or 5 things that I would like to have somebody know that that's why we did it. Because, that's the way the process works. Like some people said that we didn't need to necessarily have, that the code today doesn't, or the state doesn't require this particular element, and the state technically doesn't require it, but it's one of the elements that the state says you have to address on that. So I think we just need to go and keep that. I like those lists on that, but let's just wait until we get through this, and then we'll just go and see what we do. And we may make some changes to it based on some of the recommendations that people have. So if everybody can go to, is it okay to start on page 4?
We're not gonna read each one, right?
No.
No, you haven't.
Now, let me ask you a question, there's 2 ways of doing it. The easiest way is say, does anybody have any questions on page 4 and move on?
Comments.
Or I can go over each one to say, Stacy, talked about a balanced approach to land use plan.
I think let's try it with the page at a time.
Is there, how do you want to say, anybody have a question? Is that what people wanna do, or you want me to just go?
There's a lot of them that I put no action required.
Right.
And on page 4, out of the 4 comments, 3 of them were no action required.
And
The one that
Brent's-
Brent Reagan, that was a good one that we talked about earlier
Right.
about the technology.
And he actually has a policy recommendation later on
Right,
in there that we would address.
right.
So.
So
when you
what I emphasized under Brent's was the technologies like drones.
Right.
So, if other people maybe thought.
Could be anything.
Yeah.
But again,
That's something we wanted to
the way
talk about.
the way he said it is, he actually has identified in a specific element his idea of what technology should be.
Okay.
So
Yeah, he
it
has.
doesn't have to be addressed here, it'll be
Yeah.
addressed the way I read it, and I know it's in there, so it's there, it's on, I don't have a page number, but it's on there. So, how do you wanna do this? Do you wanna just go page by page and just say you got a comment, or you want me to go give a highlight?
Page 4 worked okay.
Okay.
I
just
wanna
wanna
come
do
back
it-
to Brett Reagan's.
Yeah.
Yeah,
comment,
yeah,
and
later on.
But we agreed that 3 out of the 4 were kinda no action required.
I
They
did.
were just comments, okay.
Then that's what they are, general comments.
So on the Brent Reagan one, I think that not here to establish or to suggest a policy, but later on.
Right.
Right,
He brings it
yeah,
up
he has
again,
it,
yeah.
he has it in a different area,
Mhm.
Right.
So page 4 is okay?
right?
All right.
Okay, page 5,
I just had a little comment by Ann Seddon's comments that just relays to sub-area planning as a way to address her issue, but the rest of them on page 5, continuing over to page 6, were no action required.
When you say sub-area planning, do you mean like,
Just-
neighborhood character type,
Right,
like Martha
well-
Cook kept bringing that up,
If
Right.
if Micah Flats wants to do
In
some
Spirit
kind
Lakes.
of a, or Spirit Lake or Athol wants to do some kind of a sub-area plan, that's kind of what sub-area planning was for.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
she
so
talked,
they
she
their
talked
own
about no
character.
cookie cutter approach.
And that is now covered in the community design.
Right.
Yeah, it's in,
Right.
Yeah.
right, exactly right,
Yeah.
it's under some area planning.
Correct.
So,
And because we, and just to comment on that a little further, because we heard that treat this area different than this area.
Right.
Generally throughout the county from various people,
right.
the
Well,
comments that I had made were that maybe we should lay the groundwork in the community design portion that maybe gives you some basic parameters for sub-area planning, establish a criteria for evaluating it or something.
Well, one of the things I know Martha Cook had said in regards to that is, in the 2010 comp plan, it has like 10 different
Right.
identifications, and she said that, for example, like Micah Flats is concerned about water, and we don't want a lot of growth here, but Spirit Lake wants the growth,
Maybe.
you know, and so,
Yeah, if you look at these three, the first one, I'm just gonna go and give a quick summary, because I think it may go a little faster, is the first one was answered by David at the meeting about the tribe. The second one is exactly right, sub-area planning is where it needs to be addressed. The third one was really a hodgepodge of he wants the county to help, with communications with the state, and failed development and impact on local, which is really, yeah,
So
on the bottom of,
Let me go back to 4, because you guys were working on this public comment report. If you're going to have action taken, so the very first one was basically Bonilla, is going to be no action,
Right.
right? I just want to make sure that you got a record
Yeah.
of what you're doing.
well, all I'm gonna do, Wes, is, cause I don't wanna go crazy, is I'm just gonna go and say that it was reviewed at the workshop on today's date.
And unless it
And then-
appears, then there was no action taken.
Right, unless
Okay.
something changes,
Just-
cause
just so
I
long as
don't
we
wanna
know.
go and say that
Right.
it doesn't require no action, cause that person does believe it requires action.
Right.
But I wanna say we reviewed it and decided not to do anything, but I don't wanna.
And some of them could be, we're not gonna address them specifically, but as a group, we put
Right.
12 of them together to come up with this minor
Exactly,
change.
exactly, that was John's point, is you can't,
Mhm.
we'd be going crazy, this already makes you
you
crazy. but-
try to deal with each one
Yeah.
at a time.
But on page 5, basically, we think we have it, either David answered it, one was just a general comment about the process in the past, and then with sub-area planning, which we already have
Right.
identified as one. On the bottom of page 6, Ann's comment was more about the problem with the state and the development and
Right.
shoreline abuse, and we don't really have those issues. The sewer lagoons and all that.
Right.
It's a state who controls it, so I didn't think anything there was something that we could do. On page 7, Marcus wants us to focus on the infrastructure, which goes back to what we've talked about with Brett Reagan to some degree also about wildfire preparation,
Mhm.
and leave a 5-acre minimum in a rural area.
I just made a comment about fire. which
Yeah,
Alan-
it's a fire, which we have a lot of comments into, I guess that would be land use number 5.
You can flag that and come back.
Yeah, we're gonna flag it, come back.
That's General policy 5.
Yeah,
Yeah.
then Mike is
But it's later.
less regulations, are better for the economy. Sandy was concerned about she thought our policy about supporting the ag and the agriculture was adding regulations, and she was concerned that we had more regulations for timber than we did for recreation.
Mhm.
And what we were doing in our policy was really just supporting the state law, and so we weren't adding regulations, but that's,
Right.
she wanted to focus on ag as number 1.
I think
She wants
She
protection.
made some good points though,
She did.
Yeah,
because,
yeah,
because she felt like we're focusing a lot on timber and ag and not at all on recreation.
Right.
So she saw a bit of an imbalance.
as far as in her view of regulations, yeah. And she also had, concern about fires. I think it might have been later on about campers that are causing fire
Right,
problems and all
right.
that, so
And Wes, that one lady that came up to us in Metamont that had a, campsite, and she was telling us that they do have some regulations that they have to abide by. Remember, she was talking
Doesn't
about having to
matter,
have a
doesn't
bucket of
pertain.
water and,
It's just-
No, this is private property.
yeah. But didn't she say that they do have some regulations?
Well, at least
We'll
they
need to
personally
next
did.
April.
I don't know whether
Get
you
through this
actually have
history.
county
I
regulations.
know,
Okay.
I was trying to.
So I'm gonna ask one final time, just to keep myself sane. When you guys go to write the summary of this report, you're satisfied that you're tracking the responses, okay?
I'm only putting in there, Wes, reviewed on whatever date.
All right.
That's all I'm putting in there because I can't,
No action taken or something.
I'm not gonna put no action taken because it may result in her comment in sub-area planning may result in us doing something in sub-area planning later on.
After we go
And
through
wildfire and.
Then you're back and forth.
Yeah, back and forth, so we.
It's almost misleading to have this action
Yeah,
taken thing in
the action,
Yeah.
the
report,
action
but you don't
take-
know.
The action taken is the wrong terminology.
Mhm.
It is just gonna say reviewed on.
I use it as a place to make a few notes.
Yeah,
that's
it's,
all.
but that's what it's gonna be
Okay.
really, cause we can't,
You guys are doing this, okay, tally, I'm not doing this part of it.
Right.
I'm just
well,
asking- I'm just asking.
it's gonna change the whole report. Here, John.
Before you leave, page 7, Marcus Smith's comment, said leave property owners 5 acres or more.
Yeah.
That, he's the first of many
Yeah.
to make that same comment, and we
Where
need to
does that
flag it
show
for
up?
later discussion.
Where does that show up, John, in, as a policy? I was trying to figure out where is, cause it's not a policy, it's a land use, it's 5 acre minimum, so where does?
Where does that come from?
Well,
Septic.
The septic is really the driver of that.
No.
Well, I'm just trying to
Septic?
figure out is how would we go and say we agree, or don't agree, but let's say we agree with 5 acre minimum in rural, and our comp plan supports that. I couldn't figure out how I would say the
Where it
comp.
would go.
Yeah, I can't figure out where.
I think probably a lot of the concern came from the ULUC attempt to change it from 5 to 40 over huge parts of the county.
Okay.
And
That's
people
part of
are
it.
saying our comprehensive plan needs to protect us from that kind of a move.
Okay,
But doesn't each zone, David, doesn't each zone have its certain characteristics, and the rural zone says a minimum of 5 acres or
Right.
something? I think that's probably where they're also getting it from.
It does, and they like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
right,
yeah, they
but we
do,
don't, but
yeah.
where in the comp plan
Some
would
do.
I look to say, we want to support a 5 acre minimum? We wouldn't say 5 acre, but we would say, where would we point to and say to the people that?
That's part of the rural character discussion
Yeah,
that needs
rural
to happen
character.
publicly.
Yeah.
Okay.
It
Yeah.
really does. I
So
mean,
that would be
we all
part-
need to come to some agreement of what that means.
So that would be part of the, getting the feedback from the people about what rural
Yeah.
character really means.
So his
In
last,
the future.
his last comment, his last sentence says, leave property owners of 5 acres or more
Right,
in unincorporated areas alone.
right,
So we're interpreting that as though he supports
good
a
point.
policy
Mhm.
that dictates 5
Right,
acres.
just a comment.
He doesn't say that.
No.
That's what we
Just leave
gather
us
from it.
alone.
And 2 lines above it, he says, don't regulate unincorporated areas.
Right, so it's a
So-
regulation issue more, John.
Well, yeah, but I'm not, so he wants a regulation that says
Paradox.
5 acres or less. That's how we're interpreting it right now.
Right,
And on the other hand, he doesn't want regulations, so you gotta.
Okay, I got
That's
you.
why I put it in anyway.
okay, I got you, okay. He wants his regulations.
Yes.
Okay, so everybody okay on 7, we'll go to 8.
We did see that 5 acres over.
And again, Mike, we already talked about the protection for timber on Sandy. She wants protection for timber from recreation people that are impacting her. I don't know if we actually have anything in any of our policies that say that under recreation, that recreation people shouldn't be
No, it doesn't.
using it.
No, it just encourages the county to assess what it
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
and then to work toward increasing it because of the large population.
Creating a master plan, so to speak, so.
Okay.
That's what the two policies do. Under recreation and public.
And Mike was hard for me to actually summarize,
You don't need.
because, he talked about ULUC, he talked about
Trust. Trust
trust
is a
and
good one.
all that. So it's more of a general comment than a specific one. Kirk David,
fire law.
No, actually, this one.
His was just a
Yeah,
compliment,
yeah,
so
this one was
with
really
no
just a
action.
compliment supporting what we were doing, so that we appreciated that one.
As opposed to the others.
Right, right. John wanted to ask us, this is an interesting one. He wanted to spell out the intent of the policy, to make the policies clearer. Versus, because sometimes, that's on page 10. And I see his point is that we had to explain sometimes what we were trying to do in the policies. So I don't know if there's something we could do here.
There is, I just thought it had some merit, and maybe we could add some language that would do a little more explanation in the document.
Well,
But not making it a huge
Right.
bigger.
Maybe not change the policy so much, but explain what the policy means or how we're gonna
Or the
implement it.
intent,
I think change the grammar, that came up early on.
yeah.
Well, then it's just like definitions, I do think we gotta get some definitions in there, people, or general welfare, what does that mean?
That's part of that public policy, collectively
Yeah.
as a citizenry, we need to determine what that means to us.
Yeah, and there's different views that.
We haven't
some-
done it.
Well,
Some
I
people
have a
think we should,
I have a definition for when we get there of general welfare, we can look over and see what we think.
but
Well, I think it needs to be determined publicly.
the policy
as
is a
part of the
policy to
goals
have
of
the
this
public
plan.
do it. To have public determine what property rights mean in health, safety, and general welfare. And that's not necessarily universally agreed upon.
won't be
It won't
easy.
be, no, it's not gonna be.
No, I mean, there's some people that do not support even going out and asking the question because property rights are inherent in our constitution.
But what is the definition? I asked Pat once years ago, how do you define property rights? He said,
hard.
there's no, I mean,
universal.
there is no,
Well-
there is, the realtors have a bundle of rights, which is a good one. And, I mean, everybody's gonna think something different of what properties, and I think the important thing for us to do is find a definition that we are gonna be willing to work with, and that's what the
And that's
definition is gonna be.
exactly right, but that's what we need to do as an objective in the comprehensive plan, is determine that. Not
Mhm.
today, not in this plan, but as a future task.
The future task. So when we
Right.
say in here, general welfare, and somebody says, what does that mean?
We need to
How do-
figure that out.
Well,
Well, you-
we need to have a definition to give them.
No, see, you weren't here for this part of it.
Mhm.
The policy is to go find out what that means. That's the policy.
Okay.
And then once we know what it ain't, then if this gets approved, that's what it would be. We're not giving them, general welfare is one of those things that are hard to find. And I bet you every government agency has a different view of it.
Sure,
But
sure.
what we're trying to figure out is what do the citizens of Kootenai County think it means
About
in
general
relationship to our primary right, cause our plan is to have, property rights as a primary, right. So we wanna acknowledge there are times when property rights don't become the absolute answer. But we need to understand what those are. And
Put them in writing.
Yeah,
That's
so
what I'm
use
saying.
that.
So if when you say property rights is primacy, what is property rights? If I were to ask you how do you define
Well,
property rights?
I don't define it.
Don't have an answer. to
Yeah,
that.
The
so
courts
we,
define- the courts usually
I'm
define
saying,
it.
well, that's what I'm thinking, is that we need to have a definition, so when somebody says, so what is property rights? Okay, this is how we are defining property rights in this document.
Right, but that's a discussion that needs to take place countywide. That one issue needs to be resolved publicly.
So when you say countywide, do you mean
Everybody.
all the municipalities in the county?
Everybody. What does that mean? I don't
Mhm.
know. When we come up with that after that bloody battle,
Mhm.
and we get 6 or 7 things that
Right.
means,
Mhm.
then that can go in the plan or into future regulations as something that helps us write those. But we don't have an answer for that, and I don't think this group could. You do?
Yeah, well,
Okay, but
The right to do anything you want with your property, right up to the point that it affects somebody else's property right.
that's kind of my definition.
I mean,
But
we heard,
collectively, we're all gonna hear different things.
we heard so many times though, what does that mean? How do you define that? when people were
where the
rubber
talking,
meets the road.
right.
Never get a specific
Yeah, I mean, I think we
answer.
need to probably move on, because we'll be here for 6 years on property rights. I mean, what we do have a policy trying to get to that answer, but we don't have it. I mean, I'm sure 7 of us have different views of it. I think the way John explains it is the easiest way to explain it. But then the trouble is, where's that line? When does your property rights affect my property rights?
Well, and just for the record, most municipalities don't try. They leave it up to elected officials. That's why there's the general language you just read, not only in policy guidelines, but also in code. You will read in code the health, welfare of the community. And then each local government, through its
Mhm.
elected body, decides what that is, just like we did last night when the county commissioners decided to uphold my decision. That was a judgment call
Right.
based on these kinds of issues.
That's what I'm saying.
But you don't have to define it
Right.
beyond just what the dictionary definition is. You don't have to. You can try, you can work at it, you can massage it. I think it's a useful exercise to try and tease out of the community, what do we all think and believe and
Right.
mean? But you don't have to have an absolute answer.
Your answer in some part will be provided by code.
And ultimately, courts.
Yes.
Ultimately,
Yeah.
you're right.
Okay, can we move on? Because we need to get through this.
And we're
By
almost
this
there.
year.
We got several months.
We're the ones who want to get it done.
I did.
That's fine.
My term's up in December, so.
Yeah, I know. Okay, we're still on page 10. So John, we think we need to do something potentially with a clearer intent of the policy. Ron and Sherry pretty much say leave it alone, no changes, no growth, no any, basically, the way I said, no changes. Robin actually wants to maybe consider taking away the word appropriate.
She had proposed specific places
Yeah,
with
right.
specific
Yeah.
changes and.
Yeah, and
I think she's right in some
Mhm.
cases.
Yeah, and so she wants
Mhm.
basically impact fees, and then also the word appropriate, she thought it was a flag for being ambiguous. And it is, but we put it in there in order to allow us
We
to
have
get
to determine
agreement.
Flexibility.
Right, but also agreement among ourselves, so, but I think she did have a lot of thoughtful.
One man's flexibility is another man's ambiguity.
Right.
Yeah, exactly, good point.
She
Um,
was trying, she was
I
trying to.
just had budget constraints on that,
alert us to
because
the
that was
importance
something we
of
didn't really
words.
talk about a lot.
She's smart.
Right, Wes.
Robin's
On taxing
She
smart.
was trying to
Taxes.
alert us to
Right.
the importance
You know,
of words.
maybe a statement.
Verbs.
Words.
Words, yeah.
Words, well,
We have
that's true.
And
something
it's
in
true,
budgeting and
it does, they
implementation
have meaning.
about
We do.
enforcement. Yeah.
Right. So that's, I just put that as a star just to pay attention to.
Right.
Yeah, I thought that.
Educational, that's.
Bev's
Informative.
is more of, Bev's, I'm sorry, Liz.
Yeah, right.
Okay, on the bottom of page 10 and starting 11, Bev's was more of a concern about developers and businesses not following land use code and the county granting variances and CUPs as a way of, without justification, is the way I read it. And I don't know what prompted this, and she talked about about us not doing the changes to zoning and all that. So I don't know if it really addressed specifically.
She's been working on these things for years. and
Yeah.
I think just as,
Right.
there's some specific things to heed, but also it's, she just letting things go.
Right.
This may not be pertinent right now, but we all have our own technique about how we look through these comments. And I ended up making notes in the margin, said this person wants the comp plan to be more restrictive, to do more. And then this person wants it to do
Yeah,
less.
exactly, I know,
And so
I know,
I was looking at that one too.
exactly.
Which is the.
And then the
balance.
next one is actually Summers, which is do less, which is if state and federal regs have, we don't need the county regs. And then also, this is a general comment here, it's later, she has it later on in other areas about view sheds and wildlife corridors.
I underlined those and had some comments on that for later.
Yeah, it's in the later, and then the Fed and the state is in later on in other ones. Again, this is general comments. David is pretty much the same as the view sheds and wildlife. And,
So why are we gonna put it off until later? We have two people right here talking about it.
Well, because-
Why not discuss it now?
you can,
We can, I just,
but what would you
beyond this,
discuss?
there's a bunch more with
Okay,
that same
but the same
comment, I don't know
comments, yeah.
how.
Yeah, see it?
That's fine, I just don't wanna skip over it and say we're
No.
gonna do it later and then not do it
When I-
later,
when I
because it's
look-
important.
When I looked at these two issues, and then I looked at what we put in this, it seems to me that it really applies in land use, and it applies only to, unless I'm mistaken, might be natural resources too, but it only applies to larger residential subdivisions, where you actually have an overarching plan in terms of where you put houses and if you leave corridors, that type of thing. So if you turn to that, wherever it is, that particular one,
Land use.
yeah, it goes, proposed land use objective 4 on page 6. Meet the varied health, safety, welfare needs of the subdivision residents through consideration of different types of transportation, roads, utilities, fire prevention measures, open space, wildlife corridors, parks, view sheds where appropriate, and water conserving landscape strategies. So in terms of land use, that's the only place that those things would occur.
Right.
Now, if we look at natural resources, let's see, it's on page 10. Work with wildlife management agencies to identify critical wildlife habitats, travel corridors, and where it's appropriate, protect and enhance these areas. There it may go into other areas too, land use wise. Provide where it is appropriate setbacks and other means to protect wetlands, shorelines, or riparian areas in order to preserve fish and wildlife habitats and water quality. So those are the two instances of it. One is very specifically dedicated to what we would think of as larger scale residential subdivisions under one ownership initially. So you have a big plan.
Mhm.
The other one deals with more generalized application of this.
View sheds are also on page 7.
Yeah, I mean, we could discuss both of them, John, if you want, if the people wanna do it right now.
I don't care, I just wanna make
Well,
sure we
but,
talk about it seriously.
Yeah, no, I think the reason I was recommending that, like the federal regs and state regs, does anybody here agree, or does everybody here agree, that wherever we have a state and federal reg, we should not have a county policy? If everybody agrees with that,
In a
then.
general sense, yes, but there are specifics where we need to
Right,
formulate
and
a
that's why,
collective
that's why
opinion
you
to
gotta
give the
look,
state.
that's why you gotta
Problem.
look at it at the individual
Right.
element. The same thing with view sheds. I don't think, I can't give a universal answer that I'm for or against view sheds. I mean, a universal answer, some people can.
Be careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah.
I saw because I went in and I looked at a lot of that Agenda 21 stuff, just for
Yeah.
information. And I put down number 6, concerns over terms and language, and then I had just a suggestion. Redo or eliminate some terms, possibly wildlife corridors and view sheds, or explain them in a different way so they're not view shed as a thing. It's just, you're looking at the overall landscape. That's kind of what we intended when we had some of that in there.
Yeah, I don't know
And
the,
so,
I don't know the right answer.
Where we can take out those words that are inflammatory, maybe.
The good news is there many times in here, in other areas, cause I know that for a fact. I do have a question for David. The current land use code has wildlife, some call them wildlife travel corridors and some are wildlife corridors. It also has view sheds in the current land use code.
Does.
How does, if we eliminate those terms, does that require us?
At some point, we need to circle
We'll have to
back and
look
amend
back
the code.
and take
So
a
it
more
is,
look at it.
even though, so if we don't actually have that word view sheds in the comp plan, we wouldn't be able to have it in our land use.
Not
code.
Well, I wouldn't go so
necessarily.
far as to say
Okay,
that.
it's not
but-
that absolute.
But, right, it's not.
Okay,
But
okay.
it's, again, good to have consistency or at least not be inconsistent.
Okay. Well, I have on my list here this issue to make sure we're addressing it later.
Okay.
Which is the view sheds, which I know is in land use.
I did the same thing as,
Yeah.
I did the same thing as Colin as far as going and researching Agenda 21. In fact, I brought some printouts I can leave with each of us.
Okay.
But we wanna be sure that, you know, a rose is a rose by any other name, right?
Right.
So just changing the words out, to eliminate the lightning rod, I don't think is the right.
No, and I guess I didn't really mean that, but I just thought cause I know our intent wasn't to do something, most of us don't even know what Agenda 21 is. So it wasn't our intent to do something like that, so
I'm
if
glad
there's
you
a
took
way
the-
we could say it different.
If you have a copy, I'll take it, John.
I'm glad you took the initiative. Well, I just wrote out articles written by other people.
Yeah. The one question I had when I read this, and actually listening to the meetings we had, was, I couldn't recall specifically why I remember the discussion we had on view sheds. Okay, I couldn't remember specifically why we actually had view sheds in there.
I think the reason we had it in there, cause I thought about that too,
I couldn't
is that
remember.
when you consider
Thank you,
a
John.
design of a subdivision, you take into account view
Right.
sheds, what you see when you look
Right.
around, that was simply it. We just look around, what do we have here? How does that relate to
But it's
the
only
land
for the
use?
subdivision, right?
Well,
Right.
No,
Yes,
but
yes,
just-
generally.
So let me say
Generally, that's
differently,
true.
the only place we would restrict anything
who
would have
said
been in
we
the
would, it's just consider
No, I'm
it.
just trying to understand. It's not the person that lives next door to the subdivision, that we would tell that person they can't have their RV out there because you're affecting my view.
No.
It was only the people in the subdivision that we were.
The developer creating the
developer was
subdivision.
creating to market that was the concept, right?
Just, when you're doing a design, look around, see what you see, how does that impact your
But
design?
it's within the subdivision.
Right.
Right.
That's my
Or
memory.
you have a
Yeah.
view of the
And
mountain
I
over
actually
here.
brought up that we have that language in the code, so it's nice to have it replicated in the,
Yeah.
and that's where you landed. And again, however you wanna massage it, we can massage the code
Yeah,
as necessary.
but I think see, I needed to get clarity of what, because what I saw online and did some other things, looking at videos and all that, it was scary from a perspective of what that meant. If it meant that, my neighbor who doesn't even live in my subdivision, but I could see their property 3 miles down, can't cut the tree down.
Right.
That's a problem.
Yeah, that
I know
is a
my
problem.
father-in-law, who lives on the lake, that people love to look at the trees on his property, and he wants to cut them down because it affects some of his views. He should be able to cut them down. So that, I didn't know what it meant, and
Going back
I
and
think
going-
that,
Yeah, going back some years ago, 2 predecessors to David Callahan, there was a lot of view shed discussion, and it meant exactly what you described.
okay.
It meant that if I live on the hill, which I do, the people in the valley don't want me to change anything I do on the hill, because it might
Right.
affect their view shed.
That would be the most extreme use
Right.
of a
And that's how it's being
concept.
used
It started with the
Yeah.
mark of Zorro on Canfield Mountain.
Mark of Zorro.
I think that it's an
Yeah.
issue that there's 2 sides to this issue.
Well, yeah.
And I think it's something that view shed issues need to be looked at individually, because in some cases, you don't wanna disrupt a view shed, and in other cases, I think it's the right thing to do is not to try to, interrupt somebody's use of their property either.
Right.
I can give you a quick example. In Carlsbad, California, there were houses, a development that sat up a little bit higher on one side of the street than the other. And these houses had a view of the ocean. Well, some developer came along and wanted to build houses right on the other side of the street that was a little lower. And and the people up here were, no, you're gonna block our view of the ocean, of course. So they made a compromise, and so the developer only built single-story houses. So he got his development, but the people up here still were able to see the view of the ocean.
And the people whose property those single-story homes was built on lost value,
Why did they lose value?
because they can only put a single-story
Right.
house on that property.
You
I
know,
know.
you make everybody happy. I mean, he's still got to develop his
And I know
property,
we
and I don't
didn't have any
know.
Well,
intention of doing
Yeah,
that.
I mean, but that, I think the point is, we need to clarify what the intent was, because you could take this word
Mhm.
to mean this big
Yes.
restricting everybody to do everything, cause someone that, or it could be very narrowly
That's why I
focused.
think we just need to have a little
Yeah,
explanation.
I think it's a good,
It wasn't intended to be.
but that's the
thing.
type of stuff we needed to go and figure out, John.
My take on this is that the people that were concerned about it were the people that saw view shed requirements coming in a zoning code.
Right.
And I don't believe that was the intent of anyone here.
No.
And I would suggest just putting the word voluntary in front of the word view sheds, and we're done with it.
Except in the case, I think, of residential subdivision development, where you've got a totality of acreage and you have the possibility to actually design. You know what I'm
It can
saying?
still be
Where you
voluntary.
can move things around. Well,
But-
that's where, where the appropriate thing comes in, I think.
Well, let me ask a question on that, Wes, or even for the,
Hang on.
okay,
Yeah, view sheds were appropriate. I mean,
yeah. I-
you negotiate.
What page
you
was that?
decide. It's on page 6.
Yeah, again, even on a subdivision, the person who's developing that, they will make a determination on what the best way to get value out of that subdivision, I would think.
My job as a planner, when people would come in and sit down about subdivisions, was to make them aware of, if you
Right.
considered this in your design, it's not a requirement. And
Right.
oftentimes they didn't and said, yeah, thanks for the,
But that would be, see, again, when you say voluntary, I think, the way I interpret it was, it may be in the best interest of the developer to have some areas that are viewed in a way.
I don't think any of us intended for it to be, if you're gonna do this subdivision, you have to protect everybody in the county's view shed.
Yeah,
Or
well, that's what we need.
save this.
So when
I
we
don't
get
think
to that
we're
particular
at that
one, we
point.
need to figure out what those words are.
Well,
If we-
now-
Definitions.
Now I'm going to have to step in because I'm going to be doing drafting, so what are you guys talking about?
Nothing yet.
Well,
Are you
what we're
looking for
talking about is
definitions? Are you
when
looking
we-
for a
I have to put the
definition?
print on the page.
Yeah, but when we get to land use, Wes, and we get to that particular objective, we're gonna have to go and where it says view sheds and wildlife corridors, we're gonna have to
We
go
have to
and.
determine what we're gonna
Yeah,
do.
what was our intent? Goes back to what John was talking about. What was the intent of the policy? The intent of the policy was not to restrict everybody from doing everything. It was to provide a developer with an understanding that they may need to do something if they want to.
Maybe
John
not.
put the word voluntary or when appropriate, whatever the word is, but.
Inappropriate's too wishy-washy.
Okay.
Voluntary is specific.
Okay, and I'm okay with voluntary, based on what the discussion we just had now, it was for that little universe called the subdivision.
I can only think of 2 cases where I've seen zoning codes that had view corridors in them. Two view corridors in zoning, and all the zoning codes I've looked at.
Austin would be one of them, preserve the view of the Capitol. For
The
instance.
third one.
Yeah.
Spokane has 2, and they've had them for at
Really?
least 50 years.
Okay.
And I don't think anybody.
I think Boise
objects
has
to it.
something like that in the Capitol.
In that way, it's usually prescriptive to preserve a view of something.
So, okay.
Yeah.
The last one on page 11, is James, and he basically, the way I took it is let market determine planning.
No action.
So, I'm not sure there's anything there. Page 12, Tiffany's was actually a back and forth between me and Tiffany and about the process. So it was just really answered at the meeting. This is another one where I think we need to, at least this is one that I put something in, is the zoning, not the zoning map, but the land use map. We talked a lot, several times, not a lot, about the fact the next phase of this would be to go and update the land use map and the data. But we have no policy today in implementation that actually says we're gonna do that. So I wrote a note to myself, is this a potential policy under implementation? To add land use map review and data update as a policy,
Under implementation.
under implementation.
That's what I had to, general statement on the map should be an implementation, not a zoning map, but a graphical representation of land use policies. Not all the policies, but just some.
That's good.
And it should be done with a spray can.
And I think David talked about at Rathdrum that ours does look like a zoning map.
It
but-
does.
And other comp plans have it to look like a land use map differently. So we need to figure out a
That's
reference.
right.
Most of them look like a zoning map.
Are they, okay.
It's
well-
hard not to, because you have to have a line
Okay,
somewhere.
see, I don't know anything about it.
That's why
really.
Jerry always said use a spray can and so the
I
lines
get that.
blur, you know.
I think where you heard the argument was that, well, you follow parcel lines. And
That's
you
an
can,
easy
in a
one.
future land use map, you can generically just broad brush things and then
Right.
come back and follow the parcel
The
lines with the
emphasis
zoning
in
map.
many attorneys I've talked to, land
Mhm.
use attorneys, say, even though the state requires the map is almost superfluous. The only thing of value are the policies.
Until you get to the public hearing.
I know, and everybody loves the map.
Now, in '94, they did the broad brush stroke, and in 2010, they did this, what looks like a
Parcel.
zoning map.
Right.
Because of the technology.
That's it.
Yeah, both-
And
both
at
of
some
them are
point, you gotta,
controversial.
Right.
gotta say, oh, is this gonna go this way or this way?
Yeah.
And
Well, I just thought that maybe, and then when we get the implementation,
Mhm.
that I have it under my implementation
So you
page
guys
here,
want,
that, do we
you want a
consider
new
that?
policy in the implementation area, which says, something about, authorizing development of future land use map and data update.
Well, we have to, we need to consider both, whether it's actually doing it or reviewing it and making adjustments or whatever the words are.
Well, you want me to write a policy?
Yeah,
That's
I mean, what do
asking.
people think it should be, anything?
Well, I thought we weren't writing the
Okay.
stuff now, we were just
Well,
finishing.
he's just trying-
I'm just trying to get what I have to write.
Yeah.
What's my
Yeah.
assignment?
The assignment will be to write one, if we agree, to update land use maps and data, in the next phase of the plan, if we agree to do that.
And
That's-
cover every particular base that might
Well,
arise.
all I'm asking is, do you want me to write a sentence which does that?
You can start writing sentences if you want.
Not now.
No, for when we get to implementation.
Yeah, I just need some clarity
Yeah.
because I don't wanna have to struggle with
I understand. We'll-
5,000 different directives.
We'll give you clarity once we get there, I hope. The other thing Art talked about, which was not specifically mentioning the Retro Prairie Act, but he wanted to.
I don't think that's necessary.
I know, and there was other people that didn't say, we didn't mention Coeur d'Alene Lake,
Right.
and we basically, I said.
We didn't mention Avondale Lake either.
Right, we
so-
talked about bodies of water, we talked about lakes and other things, so.
They are important, we know
Yeah.
that.
Page 13, Russ,
Just a compliment.
yep,
No
compliment.
And it deals with access to water,
Mm-hmm.
which is answered under the recreation thing.
Right.
And Jonathan, basically asked how the process worked. It was more of a process of
Just
how
a
the comp plan
question.
turns into a code. And Jeff was really, this was his starting statement, but really his individual requests for changes to the comp plan are in the other elements of the code.
Right. Plan.
Okay, page 14, these again were questions that were answered at the particular June 19th community meeting. Art was back to zoning map, again, which we kind of addressed on the bottom of page 14.
Right.
Page 15, wants coordination between county and cities to manage growth. So her point was,
ACI agreements.
which, yeah, I don't know if she was talking specifically about ACI, but we have ACIs, but she wanted more coordination between what Coeur d'Alene does in Post Falls and the county does on water and everything else. Ron's was basically, was to push to get this done, and he thought we were appeasing the
Right.
developers, which we weren't really, and why is it being done? And so it was more of just a general question. Next page on 16, Jerry's the other one who asked about the land use map, and that's what we just talked about. So that is another one that will be addressed in implementation. Page 16 for Jerry. Robin, again, you'll see Robin and you'll see Summer twice in many cases,
Right.
because they gave oral and written, so you'll see it twice. This was, again, talking about the word that she thought was ambiguous. Most of the issues were covered on page 10 of the document we've already talked about, and she did the taxing entities again. Jerry asked us where we.
Don't go further. She also talks about including commercial and industrial to both have infrastructure. We've got it right now, industrial.
I missed that one. What is that, Wes?
She asked that both commercial, I'm assuming large scale commercial, and industrial have infrastructure before they're approved.
I thought we had it under both, I thought we had both of them with that.
On the commercial, page 66, bottom.
I know we have it under.
Has adequate infrastructure, okay. And under commercial or industrial, which is the top of page 7. Other necessary, let's see, sufficient water supply, noise and odor mitigation protocols, wastewater treatment and disposal facilities and other necessary supporting infrastructure. And under the objective, it says, allow industrial development beyond cottage industry scale, only where appropriate and where necessary public transportation and infrastructure.
So we have it covered?
There,
I think
it's
so.
a little stronger for industrial than it is for commercial.
It should be the same, really.
So.
I'm going by memory, if it wasn't one of them, where the infrastructure is or will be available.
I've always said it is available under industry.
Because you really want,
Commercial, it says,
Serves the local
encourage limited commercial development which complements and preserves the rural character, primarily serves the local rural community, and has, meaning existing, adequate infrastructure. In other words, to build here, has implies, yeah, it exists, or it will exist simultaneously.
What about the paragraph above where it says corridors are or will be?
Here, here, permit commercial development in non-incorporated areas of counties where adequate public infrastructure corridors are or will be available, and where such development complements the surrounding character. And then when we nailed it down in the policy, it said has.
and that was for limited commercial, which we, I think, all envision smaller scale development that serves a local neighborhood or a smaller community.
Well, that's the vision, although some people have questioned.
Right.
So are you guys okay with that?
I think so. I mean, otherwise, if we dive too deep, we don't get a document done.
Okay. The bottom of page 16, Jerry's, we just wanted to know where we were from.
We
And
don't really know.
Carol, general positive comment, make plan easier to read and understand what you
No
said.
action.
Norma, one of them is redundancy of regulations, federal, state. So this is another federal, state, local regulation issue that we've kind of talked about, we'll get to when we get to the other areas, because we gotta do it by specific topic. I think she says Dr. Moon.
Yeah.
Right. She was concerned about the state and federal not
Not doing their
not
job,
doing
but
the
she
job.
was talking about Washington, so
Yeah.
maybe we'll do a better job, I don't know.
I don't know.
And
And she's she's later on,
using
in
that as an
she's
example.
also in natural resources under air quality, so her
Right.
specific thing was air quality. This was a second part of the
Right.
topic.
It was water quality too, and she was
Yeah.
referring specifically to industrial emissions. So my note to myself was it possibly is a new policy
Yes.
under land use /
Yeah.
or
Right.
natural resources.
Fine with that.
Yeah, cause I think she's trying to prevent
Well,
something like this smelter to end up in
But we
Kootenai County.
get to the policy decision later when we get to the specific chapters.
Right, it's her, she's again back in that other area. Summer's question was really comp plan versus omnibus question. That was answered by David at the meeting. And the last one, before we take a break, is Robert and Norma White, about, the way I wrote this is they were concerned that we were using a boilerplate policy approach to implement the United Nations agenda. What's NGOs?
Non-governmental
agencies.
organizations.
You're the only one in this room that doesn't know that.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
I looked it up and I forgot it.
I hate acronyms.
Yeah. So I don't know if there's anything, we didn't obviously use a boilerplate, cause we
No.
came up with each one of these on our own on that.
Well, I think they're referring to some of those trigger words again, like
Right.
viewshed and, wildlife corridors,
Okay,
those kinds of things.
Well, and her concern also included accommodating citizens' concerns. You
See,
know,
I had
this
a
thing of
question
going
of
out to your
which.
neighbors. to
Right,
get,
yeah, yeah.
To tell you what they think of your development or
Yeah.
going on it,
Which
or
concern?
however it ends up being interpreted. It was expressed by her and others.
yeah, it was about, you know, if the zoning allows it, why can't it just be done? Type of thing, you know, type of thing, and then
But I think we'll come up to that
well, we actually
more
have, we
specifically
have a
later.
specific question on that
Correct.
subdivision and land use, under that one where it says that the person would, I think it's under land use, that would go and talk to the developer would talk to the
Neighbors.
neighbors, and that's where it's come up a lot.
Organization.
Yeah,
Of a certain-
organizations.
Of a certain scale.
Of certain scale,
In other
50.
words, it's based upon impact.
Yeah. But,
Not.
Yeah.
the other things.
we're up to, we're finished with one section.
Yeah.
Property rights is next. I'd like to take it maybe, what time is it now? Come back at 2:30? Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Bob, get a brownie.
I might try one, young lady, thank you.